Hey, what is up guys? And welcome to an in-depth review on Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, the new third-person action-adventure game from Respawn Entertainment. In short, it's an experience that feels like the perfect mashup of games like God of War, Dark Souls, and even Uncharted. And while it's certainly not the most original title out there, it is without a doubt one of the best Star Wars games that we've had in years. So without further ado, let's kick things off by jumping into the visuals. Like the Battlefront series, Jedi Fallen Order is one of those games that exemplifies just how far graphics have come. Though it suffers a bit from washed out lighting on planets like Bogano, for the most part, the atmosphere its locations are able to pull off is absolutely stunning. From the eerily desolate canyons of Dathomir, to the surprisingly haunting jungles of Kashyyyk, the volumetric lighting and screen space reflections are easily some of the best around. Stuff like hair and clothing are also made more believable thanks to the game's awesome physics system, which plays an equally big part when it comes to combat and using the Force. In each location, you can tell an incredible amount of time and detail has gone into creating the various pieces that make up the many levels to this game, with all sorts of pipes and intricate panels decorating walls that would normally be left flat. Larger sets are also very imaginative themselves, with interesting assets that add a great deal of environmental storytelling, like crashed Republic gunships overgrown with moss, or a fallen AT-AT lodged in the side of a waterfall. Plus, thanks to the game's time period, you get this really cool blending of both the new and the old, as the Clone War era technology begins to fall out of favor, and the newer stuff like TIE Fighters and AT-STs begins to take hold. I also love how dynamic the levels in Fallen Order tend to be, with lots of moving parts like ships zooming around, crashing into things, and walkers turning into their own mini levels that you have to climb in order to take down. It adds an incredible amount of life to the experience, and a cinematic touch that keeps the world from feeling too stagnant. The same of which can be said for many of the indigenous species that you encounter as well. Many times there were a ton of dangerous flora and fauna mixed in with the various human enemies, making for these mini battlefields that felt extremely chaotic. Overall, it's one of the better looking games this year. And above all else, whether you're just walking around on your ship or cutting through waves of enemies, it truly does feel like you're in the Star Wars universe. And with that said, let's move on to the gameplay. So the gameplay in Jedi Fallen Order is easily the least original thing about it, but because the ideas and mechanics it borrows are all from other games that are fantastic in their own right, it ends up being one of Fallen Order's most enjoyable aspects. The combat system, for instance, which feels like a strong blend between Dark Souls and 2018's God of War, is an absolute blast, and it can be quite challenging early on depending on the difficulty you choose, especially when dealing with larger groups of enemies, as the AI in Fallen Order is actually pretty intelligent, and will often attack you all at once, rather than hanging back to fight you one at a time. And this initial difficulty curve works so well, because as you level up and start to unlock many of the game's skills and abilities, you slowly start to feel more and more powerful, until eventually, you're able to wipe out entire waves of enemies without breaking a sweat, giving you that feeling of being a true Jedi. And those different skills, especially the ones pertaining to using the Force, allow for you to pull off some pretty neat tricks, like throwing an enemy off a ledge or force pushing a grenade back at them so that it blows up in their face. This part of the game is by and large a massive amount of fun, but it's actually the few times that you end up encountering another lightsaber user that really sell the experience. And just to give you a small taste of what I'm talking about, I'll play a quick snippet of one of the early boss fights so that you can see for yourselves.
Just a scratch!
The majority of boss fights in Fallen Order are a tremendous amount of fun to try and overcome. Some with multiple stages and a level of difficulty that makes you feel like a real badass when you do finally learn a boss's moveset or get their timing down. Alongside that, Jedi Fallen Order offers a great deal of challenge in the form of unique puzzles, which feel heavily inspired by games like God of War, with the main difference being that you'll be using the Force to solve them rather than the Leviathan axe. And overall, I thought these provided a nice break from all the action. I also like the ways in which the levels themselves are set up for you to navigate with a style of movement that's more akin to Uncharted than most combat-focused games, as you jump, climb, and swing your way across the different maps, which contain a multitude of shortcuts and hidden rooms for you to discover that make returning to old areas more meaningful in the future. And the game actually has a lot to offer when it comes to unique loot that you can find for customizing the look of your character, with stuff like new ponchos and different parts for your lightsaber that you can mix and match to really make it your own. Overall, it's a very cool blend that does a good job at showing why sometimes you don't have to reinvent the wheel if you're just looking to make a fun experience. Honestly, my only complaint here is the fact that you can't dismember human enemies. Moving forward though, let's check out the sound.
Death is near. Lack finesse. I will not lose.
Okay, throttle.
Report, what's happening over there? You're in violation of Imperial Protocol
Shut that guy up.
207. Stand down or we won't hit.
Let's do this. That's the blasters. Whoops.
Up first, we'll kick things off with the music. If you're a fan of the Star Wars films, you're going to feel right at home in Jedi Fallen Order. Of course, most of the tracks here are entirely new, but you'll notice that the score takes a lot from both the original trilogy as well as the prequels, with some of the darker moments surrounding Order 66 almost feeling as if they've been taken directly from Revenge of the Sith. It's very nostalgic in that sense. And like the visuals, I enjoyed that sort of hybridization of the two eras, as it fits very well with the time period of the story. Voice acting is also pretty good, and I especially loved all of the different alien languages throughout the game. It gave you a sense of just how diverse and massive the galaxy is. Though I do wish they would have used more audio filters to help alter voices depending on what type of location you were in, such as adding a bit more echo to dialogue inside of caves. As it stands, there simply isn't enough variation here, which is strange considering just how believable all of the different environments sound, with all sorts of exotic birds and insects chirping in the background, as well as some fairly convincing weather effects. Not to mention, combat in this game is basically dessert for your ears. Blaster fire is essentially flawless in its ability to create nostalgia, and when you end up running into another lightsaber user or purge trooper, the effects during those battles are simply unmatched, and allow for you to feel as though you truly are in the films. Though there's still some room for improvement, very impressive sound design across the board. And with all of that out of the way, and without mentioning any spoilers, let's move on to the story. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order puts you in the shoes of Cal Kestis, a Jedi Padawan trying to escape the Emperor after the events of Episode 3 and the Jedi Purge, as he seeks to rebuild the Jedi Order. Though it's not a bad story by any means, I think they missed a huge opportunity for something special, especially given the time period that this game takes place. As at very few points during this sort of lead up to your standard Rebellion storyline, do you ever get the feeling that you're actually being hunted by the Empire, aside from a couple flashbacks and a few random bounty hunters that you encounter. In my opinion, this is definitely an experience that could have benefited a lot from a greater focus on the scum and villainy side of Star Wars, with more of an emphasis on stealth and hiding from the Empire within the grimy underworld of the galaxy. It's a real shame there wasn't more of that, because you do get some small hints of greatness, namely during the beginning of the game, and again, particularly during various flashbacks pertaining to Order 66, which is when the story is at its absolute best and firing on all cylinders. Now, despite that misstep, there are still some great moments here that make the story worth experiencing, such as Cal's relationship with his droid, and his unique ability to learn the history of objects just by touching them.
That's all. I wrote it. Years ago. You touch an object and witness events connected to it. You feel its history.
It's an echo in the force from the object.
Not many Jedi have that skill.
And overall, throughout the story, there were a decent number of wow moments and jaw-dropping surprises relating to certain characters in your lightsaber that I refuse to spoil. But let's just say that they left a massive grin on my face every time. All in all, though it wasn't entirely my cup of tea, and while it does have some questionably cheesy writing at times, it is still a story that's worth playing through if for nothing else than for some of the big reveals and the sheer enjoyment that the rest of the game has to offer. And with that said, it's time to give this game a final rating. After playing the last two Battlefront games and watching The Last Jedi, I found myself falling out of love with the Star Wars universe. I think most people can agree that those three things were not what they should have been. But after watching a show like The Mandalorian and finally getting my hands on this, that sour taste on my mouth is all but gone. Though it does have its issues, this is easily one of the best Star Wars games that we've had in years, landing it at an 8 out of 10 in my book. It may not be for everyone, especially if you're not a fan of Star Wars or gameplay in titles like God of War and Dark Souls, but for those who are, I think you'll really end up enjoying what this one has to give. But anyways guys, that's gonna do it for this review, so thanks for watching, hopefully you found the video helpful, and as always, I will see you in the next one.